Hello everyone. I'm going to record a video for those people who care for somebody who has personality disorder, personality difficulties or complex trauma. I'm doing this video in combination with the other video I did for Mind, which was for people who have the difficulties themselves. So my presumption is that you will have seen that. So first of all, just to introduce myself before I plunge in. So first of all, to say a bit about myself. My name's Yola, or Yola if you're Welsh. I work professionally in the field of personality disorders. I manage the national COugh training in the southwest of England. I work with various mental health trusts and other places, writing training, delivering training, training trainers, and a whole lot of other things in the field. I have an MSc in personality disorders, and I also have lived experience of a personality disorder. So I come from various angles for these difficulties. So as I said, this video is for people who are carers for or support people with personality disorders. I'm not that keen on the term carer. It could be that you're a friend, it could be that you're a family member, it could be a whole load of things, but I'm going to use the word carer just to make life a little bit simpler for this video. Also, for those people who have the difficulties themselves, they may have no carer. I know for me, I've not ever had a carer, that there are parts of me that are more able to support the rest of me. So it could be that the carer is within you as well. You will have had, there's lots of other advice around for this COVID time, how to cope and support people. There's the general Mind videos, which hopefully that you've seen and will, I'm sure, be of use to. I'm going to specifically share with you about these difficulties and being with people with these difficulties. I'm sure you will have had loads of your own coping strategies that you use already, and the person themselves, and that you work together to cope. So I'm hopefully not going to patronize you, but hopefully I will point out a few extra things that might be of help to you. So first of all, an introduction. I'm going to start this introduction by just sharing some background information with you, really, as a carer. There's loads of myths out there as to whether these difficulties exist, if people are trying it on, a whole load of things. So I just wanted to, really reassure you that these are real difficulties. They have been in the mental health classification systems for decades. They are a definite type of mental health difficulty. And there's been a massive amount of research nationally and internationally about the difficulties, and there's been a raft of government policies for working with people with these difficulties, especially in the last 20 years. There's lots of articles, books to read. Can I suggest one in particular to you? It's from the Department of Health. It's called Meeting the Challenge, Making a Difference. If you look that up on search engines, it would be helpful to you and most probably the person who has the difficulties. It's a general overview of the difficulties, and it is very well written. Every year, research is updated, continues. There's a big conference every year that's called Big Spud, where all the evidence in this field comes together, or a lot of it, and people share where it is at the moment. So that's two things. Just wanted to share some others. There's been lots of stigma around this field. A big turning point was in 2003 when there was a document called personality disorder, not a diagnosis for exclusion from the NHS. And that was saying that people are not to be excluded from services because they have these difficulties or this diagnosis. And that sort of was a groundbreaking document. There were competencies developed in another document, and there's been more and more research to build on that and documents. There is still some stigma around that, largely through a lack of understanding and people not having had training. Training's been fairly poor in this area, but it is improving. So, it's really to say people should never be excluded from services because of these difficulties. And if services are saying that to you, well, it needs to be challenged. Because the difficulties are long lasting and can need a lot of support, people in hidden ways try and exclude people, but it really, really should not be happening. Also, from a really sad point of view, people can very much move forward. There's lots of evidence that people can move forward with these difficulties, largely due to developing coping mechanisms and other things, but suicide rates sadly are high too. It's one of the groups of people who sadly most complete suicide in the mental health world. The next thing I just wanted to share, there are 10 types of personality disorder. This training is there are thousands of people out there who have these difficulties but haven't been diagnosed. That you have to reach a psychiatrist usually to be diagnosed. Lots of people don't for a whole variety of reasons. It doesn't mean people haven't still got the difficulties. But if somebody has been diagnosed, please could you have a look at what the difficulties are for that particular diagnosis. When I'm training, I train mental health staff, prison officers, probation officers, a whole load of people, and they tell me people have EUPD, people have antisocial personality. Well, what are they? And people generally don't know. Each personality disorder has its own criteria, and I would, encourage you to look up what the criteria are for specific personality disorders, so that is this part of the personality disorder or is this something else? Places I encourage people to look are National Mind and the Royal College of Psychiatrists. Online, it's a bit of a minefield. Some things are not helpful. You want things to be clear. Another key point is that the research has shown that 95% of people with these difficulties have something else with it as well, comorbid. So that could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be bipolar, it could be eating disorder, it could be dual diagnosis. So it's likely to be complex because there'll be the personality disorder part of things, which might not just be one, it might be loads of different types, and then there'll be other things as well. So it's important that people are individual and their individual needs are worked with and responded to. So, as in the other video, I'm going to look at the core difficulties that go across all 10 personality disorders, because that I feel is, probably the most beneficial to do. As we said, the specific difficulties for specific ones, but these core difficulties go across all of them. So moving on to the core difficulties. So as I said in the other video, the core difficulties with this mental health difficulty, it's not just behavior. It's, we never, as humans, don't just behave. It's things that have happened with our thoughts, feelings and behaviors. It's often the result of trauma, things that people have learned or not learned. It can be extreme, long lasting. And it's often to do with with relationship type things. Nobody's born with a personality disorder. All the evidence points to they develop in childhood and come out in adulthood. So the core difficulties I'm going to talk about are problems with feeling and expressing feelings, emotions, impulsivity, unstable moods, identity issues, black and white thinking, all or nothing, rigid thinking, relationship difficulties, and times of crisis and non-crisis. So, the first one, feelings and expressing feelings. In each area, I'm going to sort of build on what talked in the first video, but then also share some special carer top tips. So, feeling and expressing the feelings. As we said, it's important for the person to be able to reach their feelings, to be able to express them in whatever ways they can. That could be spiritually, art, music, whatever works from them. Naming their feelings, and perhaps that's something that you can help them with. Maybe show a list of feelings. It's not for you to tell them they're feeling scared or upset. It's for people to start to learn and identify that they are. Another thing is supporting people, is that feelings do get acted out. It could be people can really struggle to express their feelings. I know for me, I really struggle to show my feelings. I'm often either very thought driven, like at the moment, or quite emotional. And if I'm very emotional, I often struggle to speak at all. I can be mute. I know you might not believe that from today, but when I'm really emotional, it's really hard to speak and communicate then. So it's about not judging people, understanding where they're at and going with it, as long as it's helping them in whatever way you can. So with feelings and expressing feelings, some of the top tips for carers are, you can help people reach their feelings, but give space to your feelings. You will have feelings that need expression too, and you need to let off steam for yourself. Because there's a real danger that if you don't, you'll project your feelings onto the other person, and it won't help you to stay healthy in a mental way if you're not dealing with your feelings. 2, if the person wants to express their feelings by talking with you, it's really important, if it's in an intense way, not everyday conversation, that you're really there for them, that you're really hearing what they're saying, and that you're checking out with them, that you're understanding correctly what they're trying to say to you, and that you're watching verbal and non-verbal cues. This is called validation. Don't ever presume that you're understanding what someone's saying. You really need to check out with them. You will have your view of the world, but you need to make sure that you're tapping into the other person's view of the world. It's also important that you have an available mind. For all of us, it's not good to be speaking, quite intensely with someone when they're in the middle of doing a whole load of things, and you can't concentrate and your mind can't be available. Maybe, have some special time for both of you where you can have, a really good conversation. That can't be all the time, but at particular times. The third top tip is always treat the other person as an adult. It could be that there's quite a lot of disparity within a person. So like for myself, I've just passed an MSc, so intellectually I can be at one end of the spectrum, but emotionally I can still be quite childlike, mainly because my emotions haven't developed in the same way as other parts of me. But it doesn't help if somebody treats me as a child, because my mind then clicks into child mode, and it leads to even more issues. I don't choose to go into that, my mind emotionally does. So it's really important at all times that you try and stay adult, both of you. It's also really important that you don't rescue people, because ultimately you can't, there's a tale of catching a fish. If you catch the fish for the person, they've got it that day. But if you teach them how to fish, they can do it for life. So it's really important that you don't do that rescuing. The last thing, the fourth thing in the top tips, is there is no magic pill. for personality difficulties, complex trauma. It's a long, rocky road. So you need to be patient, the person needs to be patient. It's about empowering the person, learning coping mechanisms and practicing new skills as you go along. So that patience is really important. The next area is impulsivity. So this is when a person goes straight from strong feelings to action. It's really important to point out that, you know, quite a big thing in this field is it's really hard to think and feel at the same time. So as I was describing to you, you know, at the moment I'm very much in thinking mind. At other times I'm very much in feeling mind. It's very hard to do both. But it's really important that the person gradually learns to do both. Because if you go just into feeling mind, it can go to actions, and if you're not thinking, it can have lots of consequences. Mentalization is a therapy that particularly looks at thinking and feeling at the same time, but it's a skill that people, you know, are learning all the time. So again, reminding people, encouraging people to release feelings as they go along, where they might be coming from. And all the time with impulsivity, prevention is better than the impulsive action. So the more that you encourage that. Carer tips for impulsivity. Ask open questions of people to try and help to keep their thinking going, especially if that emotional mind is very much coming into play. 2, encourage people to think about what their triggers are. Because a more a person can work with their triggers, maybe plan for them, work with them, then that will really help them. The triggers are likely to be from the past, but you know they will impinge on now. And also coping mechanisms. So like for me, there's a particular time of year that really triggers me. So it's with the people who support me, it's about planning for that time. It's going to happen, but how can it happen in the best way possible? It's about, you know, building and coping mechanisms for what you can do. Some triggers are unavoidable, but some you might know are coming. And also be mindful of your triggers. You're human, you'll have triggers, and it's about you working with you, your triggers, and the person with the difficulties with personality disorder, working with those as well. So the next one is unstable moods. As you will know, in personality difficulties, moods will change very rapidly. Someone might, you know, be really calm and then suddenly become really agitated and angry. And that can be very draining for them, but also, as you know, for you. You know, we said some things in the other video. You know, the first thing, really encourage people to take care of their mental health and their physical health. And perhaps you encouraging people to get support for their physical health too. Life expectancy of people with severe personality disorder is a lot lower than the average population. For women, it's 18.7 years. For men, 17.7 years from 2012 research. So why? Why do people with these difficulties die earlier? Yes, some sadly is suicide, but it's also cancer, heart disease and things like that. You know, and you know, there's no definite answers. It could be that people can struggle to look after themselves sometimes. It could be, you know, impulsivity going wrong. It could be a whole host of reasons. It could be feelings coming out through the body. There's a big link with medically unexplained symptoms that if you know, can't cry or whatever, show emotions, it might come out through your body. So as we said, hopefully encouraging the person you care for to learn about triggers, emotions, self-soothing, and what they like doing. And then, you know, in this time of lockdown, especially for you, we said, what are your triggers? What self-soothes you? What do you like doing? Because you are just as important as the person with the difficulties. So some special carer tips. A big thing in this field is about understanding, not blaming. So a big phrase is, what's really happening here? So if somebody is behaving in a certain way, being emotional, it's not obvious. Just standing back and thinking, what's really going on here? Is it from the past? Is it now? Is it both? Is it to do with another part of the person? Do I have a part of this? Am I triggering something? Is it something in me that's being projected? It's really important that the more we can gain understanding and talk with the person and they gain understanding, then we can be more aware of how we can help ourselves. The next one is identity. So it is about the person learning more about themselves, but also maybe in this time of COVID, what are the positives of your relationships? You know, I'm sure the difficulties are really in your face, but what are the positives of your relationship? The person you care for will have lots of positives. And what together do you have that is really good? So we're saying, you know, 2, for the person to record their strengths, but also for you, what are your strengths, and reminding yourself of those strengths if things are really getting to you. And then, you know, from the lockdown, it's what have you both learned about each other during that time? You'll both be survivors of the time. What have you learned about each other? The next one, black and white thinking, rigid thinking, all or nothing thinking. This is to, you know, emphasize that there is lots of research now about impact of neural pathways, neuropsychology of personality disorders, due to the way, you know, thinking develops, particularly in relation to trauma. So again, it's this understanding word. If someone's doing something, are they being selfish? Is it because that's the way they've learned to survive? So the tips in this area, it's really helpful, as I said in the other video, for you to model other ways of thinking. Again, it's not being right or wrong, but just model different ways, that things aren't all or nothing. Someone isn't either to be loved or hated. There are grey areas in the middle. You might like a bit of something, but not like another part of it. Also, sometimes there's this big thing that can happen. Someone might really hate you 1 minute, really love you 1 minute. That will, you know, that can take time to move, but it's again modeling that, you know, your love for somebody. 2, encourage the person to know what they enjoy and doing it if it's possible, especially in this lockdown, but also you doing that, you modeling what do you enjoy and what is possible, and doing it. And 3, being patient with the person and with yourself. You know, these difficulties are long standing. It takes time, especially now. It's not going to all be solved in a lockdown. And just, you know, being easy on yourself, don't beat yourself up. The next one, relationship difficulties. I'm sure you will have noticed this one. Okay, so there's, you know, you know, again, understanding how would a person know how to cope with relationships if they just haven't learned in childhood, if there hadn't been healthy, secure relationships. Particular tips for you during this time. 1, encourage the person to communicate with you in whatever way they can. And as we said, words might be hard. Non-verbally, writing down pictures, whatever way they can communicate. 2, encourage the person to develop their own boundaries that are helpful and constructive, and respect those. You know, they might not be boundaries that you would have, but as long as they're not harming anyone, not harming you, not harming them, then, you know, maybe they can be respected. Depends what they are, of course. But then this is absolutely key. Building your own boundaries for your space and time. And really explaining and being clear with the person you care for what those boundaries are and why they're needed. You have a right for your space and time too. But be consistent in that. It's really hard to understand and follow boundaries if someone's changing them all the time. It's really important to be consistent. And also it can lead to what's called splitting. If one person does a boundary another way, another person another way, it's like, with parents, one's a good guy, one's the bad guy. It's really important to be consistent in those boundaries. Again, be adult to adult. And again, by you keeping boundaries, you can model it to the person you care for. And 4, maybe, I'm sure you do have routines and boundaries that you share together. It doesn't have to be your boundary, their boundary, ones that come together. The next one, crisis, non-crisis. So again, encourage the person to share what a crisis means to them. Perhaps think, what does a crisis mean to you? What do you see as their crisis being? And think through that. You might reflect to them, but see what they say. The end, it's, the person's very ill at that point, and it's respecting that. 2, be prepared. What happens in a crisis? Does the person have a crisis plan? Where is that plan? Is it, readily accessible? Is it realistic? And again, remembering that services are there for you during this lockdown. 3, crisis time can really be a time for survival, getting through it. Non-crisis times are more the time for learning and moving forward. And the last one, something that I was taught, holding the hope. Somebody who was supporting me, they said, when you're not in crisis, you can hold the hope. But when I go into crisis, the person caring for me held the hope. I wasn't able to hold the hope anymore. Then when I came out of crisis, she gave me the hope back. So it meant that the hope was still alive. It was just changed from one person to another, depending on if the person with difficulties could hold it at that time. And that was really important for me, because it's really hard to get through these difficulties if you don't have hope. Change. When you know that things are changing with the lockdown, again, think through together the implications, practically and emotionally, outside the home and inside the home, and plan ahead. And take time to do this. It might take, a lot. It can take time to go in and really think through something. You and the person with the difficulties might need to regain confidence. It might take time to do that. Then probably the most important part of this video that I have mentioned already, look after you. You can't care for someone else if you're not in a good place yourself. The bottom line is these difficulties are very difficult for the person who has them, but also for everyone around them. They are relational difficulties in many ways. Don't be a sponge. It's really important that you offload so that you're not saturated and lose your health. There will be hiccups. It's the nature of the journey. It's a long journey, but always be looking for the upward curve. And please point out to people when they're, making progress. They may not notice. And hopefully an encouraging ending. You can do this. The person with the difficulties can hopefully get through this time of lockdown, and hopefully you can too. But you need to value yourself. You need to take care of yourself too. It's a time of learning for you, the person with the difficulties, and your relationship. It could really strengthen your relationship if there's more understanding there for both of you. The importance of working together, you both as adults, but with love in that sharing and that relationship. Again, it could be a new phase for you and for them and your relationship when you come out of it. And lots of good wishes from myself, Yola, and from Bristol Mind. Take care.